So at that time, we started training administrators and leaders in our network to become class reliable observers. We then needed to build capacity, so I became a class affiliate trainer, so I'm a certified trainer for toddler and pre-K. We then adopted very quickly my teaching partner as a means to start coaching teachers, so became a credentialed MTP coach, and also have been an MMCI instructor and a myTeachstone coach as well.
Hi everyone, I'm Paula Polito. My primary role is owner and operator of a child development center located in Jefferson Parish. We serve about 165 children per day, and I employ about 50 teachers full-time and part-time. In addition to that, I serve as a leader for Jefferson Parish Early Childhood Program as well, their core leadership team. There we are. And so I help in that regard, and I also serve as the chair of Louisiana Department of Education's Early Childhood Advisory Board. So I wear several hats, and like Sarintha, I have the MTP affiliate trainer under my belt, MMCI certified trainer, class pre-K as well as toddler certified trainer as well. So we deliver that. I deliver that to teachers in the child care industry as well as teachers and principals in the school system.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And what I'm going to do now is basically just give everybody on the call a rundown of how this Ask Me Anything event is going to work. And thanks so much for those impromptu introductions. That was really helpful. So the way this is going to work today is we've collected questions from our class community, and I'm going to be the moderator for this event. So I'm going to ask a mix of these questions as well as any live questions that we receive during the webcast. So we really encourage you all to add any questions that you have as they come up during this session. Please just use the chat box to let us know if you've got questions for us, and we'll try to integrate them into our schedule today. If we run out of time and we're not able to answer all of the fantastic questions within the hour, we will, as our class community members here at TeachStone, we will find ways to respond. And in the past, we've done things like include blog posts and other resources that get at some of the questions in the follow-up email that we'll send out. We've also done things such as post those questions within our class community on Facebook. And sometimes we even turn those questions that you have into blog posts that we publish on our blog. So we will try to find creative ways to address all those questions. And you can know that you can always contact TeachStone as well if you would like to speak to a class expert about any of these questions that you may have. So afterwards, please just look out for an email and a recording, and we'll include the recording from this event as well as any other resources that become relevant as our conversation goes on today. So without further ado, we are going to go ahead and get started. And so I'd love to kick off our Ask Me Anythings with a nice simple question. It's a fun one. So our first question is, what is your favorite class dimension and why?
I'll go ahead and take this one. So instructional learning format is one of my favorite dimensions, and in my MMCI training I found it exciting to introduce that dimension in an interesting way. So while we know ILF as the dimension that we call the hook, or what keeps people excited, what keeps our kids excited in the classroom, I did that for my participants in our Making the Most of Classroom Interactions training. And we did fun things throughout the training. We did prize giveaways and different things to just keep them engaged. I thought it was a really interesting way to show them parallel processes. This is exactly what we want for our children, and here's what I want for you guys as participants. So, and it's an exciting one as well. It's, you know, how do we make it exciting? How do we make it fun? And so ILF is one of my favorites.
So I'll jump in and say that regard for child perspective is probably my favorite. I always feel like we should say something like concept development or quality of feedback, but truly, if we're being honest, regard for child perspective is my favorite. And I think it's because I've always felt like children need choices, and providing choices and, allowing them to have true leadership opportunities, those kinds of things really are meaningful for very young children all the way up through even the preschoolers that we work with.
Well, thanks so much for that. I have to also just add my personal response, which is that I always say regard for student perspectives as well. So we have that in common, Sarintha. I think that's a popular one. We recently asked that question in our class community, and regard comes up a lot. So that seems to be a popular and I think often overlooked one for people new to class when they first learn about it. It's like, oh yeah, that is really important. But maybe not talked about as much as it could be. So we'll get started, and I'm just going to preface our compiled questions from our community to say there were a couple of trends and themes that I saw in the questions we got. So I'm going to do my best to provide a variety of questions so that we get a well-rounded session today. And the first category I'm going to dive into here are questions related to teacher support. And we got a lot of really great questions related to really teacher engagement and providing them feedback and what can be done to really support teachers. So I'm going to dive in with our first question, which comes from, from Brian. His question was, how do we help teachers who are in denial of scores that they may receive from an observer?
Well, we want to start off positive. We want to assure them that we are there to support him or whomever, the teacher, and that we're going to take a deeper dive in the scores themselves, really look at the full picture to identify maybe where the shortcomings were. But we want to start off with what they did really well. So I would address those strong points, whether it be in positive climate or whatever dimension it was, highlight what they did really well. We have found that teachers are very hard on themselves, and so it's incredibly important to let them know that they've done incredible work on these dimensions, and that with some small changes, they can increase their scores. We've seen that locally. We've also heard that all over the state at a recent Teacher Leader Summit, that teachers are just so hard on themselves. And even though those scores may be, better than most. So again, highlight the positive, support where we can grow with them, but assure them that they're headed in the right direction.
And just to add to that a little bit, because we have come across some teachers in our network that were upset by their scores, thought they should have scored much higher. And I think Paula's right in that immediate feedback, you start with a positive, but the other strategy that we find works really well is to use video of teachers. So just a casual video off of an iPad, capturing some of that, or even on a smartphone and playing back to a teacher is incredibly helpful. We've found using MTP as a coaching, year-long coaching strategy really helps teachers see themselves and what their strengths are, but the areas they really need to work on. I know that not everybody can invest in MTP, but we've worked with programs that have just done it with some video and been able to play the video back with the teacher and ask her to identify her own strengths and some areas that she might want to improve upon, even from just one 20-minute segment. So I think those are some good places to start, but it is definitely an issue for some teachers, and they need some help to move past it.
Thank you. Such a good point. And I love that idea of using video to really support the teachers who are there and having some trouble with their scores and accepting that. Really helpful. So continuing on with the theme of supporting teachers, we had another good question, which was, how can I get my teachers more engaged with myTeachstone? And that comes from Nikki. And I will just expand that a little bit because I know there's probably listeners here who are using or thinking about using myTeachstone, but are also just probably more generally interested in teacher engagement as a bigger concept. So, so just really a question about getting teachers more engaged, whether it's with a technology, professional development platform such as myTeachstone, or really any of the efforts that you've had experience in.
Well, let me answer that first by saying that in Louisiana, CLASS is the only tool that's being used for teacher evaluation and is being reported as the quality of the program using performance profiles. So we, I think, have less issue with teacher engagement because everyone is so aware that those CLASS scores translate into a performance profile that is shared with the public. But that, of course, is not enough for all programs and all teachers. I think really, though, I hate to say the same thing Paula just said, but I really think, truthfully, starting with the positive and helping teachers begin to see what they're doing well is still a great place to start, even with engagement. With the myTeachstone tool, we found one way to increase engagement is to pair use of myTeachstone, which, if you're familiar with it, is a web-based platform for teachers to watch videos of other teachers and supporting them to identify effective interactions and less effective interactions within those videos. We paired that with face-to-face coaching to enhance that engagement. What we did find, and some of you may have as well, that some teachers engage more than others. So knowing that a coach was later coming into the classroom and going to ask them, you know, what did you think of this video? You saw a teacher doing these kinds of activities to engage with a child. Have you tried them? And again, it's one strategy. And I'll just share quickly that another strategy that Louisiana used in a statewide pilot was to provide a stipend to the teachers who met a benchmark of engagement in myTeachstone at the end of the school year. And for some teachers, that stipend was sufficient to increase their engagement, but even that didn't work for all teachers. And you know, oftentimes it's not because of lack of motivation, but maybe what's happening in their life circumstances. So those are a few that have worked for us, but we'd even, if someone wants to type some other ideas into the chat box, we'd love to hear some things that maybe have worked for you as well.
Thanks so much, Sarintha. Yeah, I think that's always like the question, right? Like how to really build engagement. So yeah, if anyone on the line has that question. And also just to say, I mentioned our online community that we have on Facebook, the class community. We'll send out the link to that as well to you all if you haven't joined. Those are the kinds of questions and discussions that happen in that group. So we've seen some really good brainstorms on topics like that in the class community. So I'd also encourage people to join that community and ask those kinds of questions because we can always get additional strategies on that topic. So our next question is sort of related, and I'm just going to continue that trend as we're talking about teacher support. It comes from Jane, and she wants to know in what ways have you differentiated professional development and coaching opportunities to different teachers?
So this one is a loaded question, but a great one. You know, I think it depends on the teacher And each of the tools that we've worked with, myTeachstone, MMCI, a simple introduction class, a 2-day reliability class, MTP, there are different requirements within each one. So I believe it depends on your audience, your teacher. When we were discussing the questions before we got on today, and one of the things that came up was, what comes first? Does MTP come first? Does myTeachstone come first? And so I think, we were lucky enough in Louisiana to offer a variety of things, and we sort of layered the different components. And so I think that's important, but it's also important to identify whom you're working with, and the qualifications, if you will, of that person, and the time that person has to follow it out with fidelity. So if you are working with a teacher that is got a full-time job as a teacher, you're not going to want to give that job as a coach to that teacher as well. So you want to look at really what opportunities that person has to engage in an MMCI coaching position, or if that person just needs an introductory role.
When Paula and I were laughing a little bit, because as we looked at this question in the beginning, I thought, I wish we could answer that we lived in the ideal world and we had data on all of our teachers in terms of where they are, in terms of strengths and areas of concern on the class tool, and that we absolutely only made database decisions about professional development matching. We are not in the ideal world. We obviously do have some data. Our Department of Education actually has a database of class scores of all teachers over the last couple of years, and we're able to tap into that. So we do know that most of our teachers have a pattern similar to other teachers around the country, that they score lowest in the instructional support strategies. So we have very much tried to tie all of our professional development resources around the instructional support strategies, but also knowing that having a better understanding and better skills in the other dimensions also helps impact those instructional support strategy scores. So going back to Paula's favorite of ILF, for example, if we're using a variety of modalities and materials to get children engaged, and even thinking about regard, that we are following their lead and their interests, then we know we're going to increase the opportunity to get to the instructional support strategy. So we are using what limited data we have, but we're also using the data that's available through Teachstone with respect to those profiles of what teachers look like generally, and then trying to best match teachers to what resources we have.
Thank you. And thank you for really bringing up and highlighting the parallel process aspect of class, that we can really use class not just as a classroom assessment, and not just as we're thinking about interactions between teachers and children, but as we think about interactions with anyone across a whole implementation system, and using those dimensions to really frame and think about different layers of teacher support and individualization is such a helpful point to keep in mind through all of this. I did want to bring up, we had a comment from Bridget Ray with Agenda for Children in New Orleans. She's on the line. Hi, Bridget. And she just mentioned, as we were talking about engagement, that she's been an early user of myTeachstone from when the platform was first around, and used an engagement campaign with Teachstone's assistant to attempt to increase teacher, administrator, and coach use of myTeachstone. I remember that campaign. We actually held a contest and created some benchmarks to try to get a certain level of engagement with all of the professional development resources across both teacher and coach usage. And so thanks for bringing that up, Bridget. And I think anytime you can create some kind of really specific goals and expectations with, the promise of achieving something. If programs make those outcomes, it can be really useful. And I remember that from the early days of myTeachstone as well. I wanted to, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to add to that and say hi to Bridget. We are beginning to use myTeachstone with our Child Development Associate Credentialing course that we are launching in about a week or two, and are trying to use some of the lessons learned from those kinds of pilots to be able to figure out how to increase engagement with myTeachstone. And having those benchmarks that you talked about are going to be a big part of that as well.
Fantastic. Thank you for that additional detail. I did want to touch on, you mentioned MTP and you've mentioned MMCI, and I wanted to just do a check-in because I realized that we may have some listeners who may not be aware of or what those programs are. And we actually have a question around which class PD option may be right for us. And they list MMCI, MTP, and myTeachstone. So that came from Nikki. So I'm wondering if we could dive into that one a little bit, and maybe that would be a good opportunity to expand on a little bit more about what those programs are about and which teachers or programs they may be right for, in your opinion.
Absolutely. So MTP is my teaching partner. It is, we've done it in Louisiana since 2015, I believe. We're on our 4th year of implementation. And it is a very intense model, typically runs about a 2-week cycle in regards. The first initial is going to be where a teacher would take 30 minutes of video within her classroom. 2 different dimensions are identified within that video. So we might have one that might fall within emotional support or classroom organization, and then one always in instructional support, beginning with quality of feedback. So after that initial video is taped, it's uploaded into the Teachstone website, at which point the coach would review the video, edit it, and limit it to 3 one-minute prompts. Those prompts are then sent with a 30-second, 1-minute clip, 30-second to 1-minute clip to the teacher, and she has a chance to respond to those prompts. Those prompts are always in a positive light, highlighting the great things she did, but then pushing a little bit as to what else she could do to increase that interaction. After she replies to the prompts, we then meet, and the way we do it in Jefferson is always a face-to-face meeting, at which point we'll conference, talk about the video, and then design an action plan that she will do in her next 30-minute segment. That cycle is repeated for at least 10 cycles. So a very intense program, MTP. MMCI, Making the Most of Classroom Interactions, is going to be a 10-week class, if you will. Each class is a 2-hour deep dive within each dimension. And so it's not as intense, and you can reach around 17 participants. So it's important to really, as I've discussed before, it's layering this. I don't think there's any one tool, whether it be MTP, MMCI, that is going to hit everything. MTP is going to be a bit more individualized, whereas MMCI is going to capture each dimension as a whole and take a deeper dive within that dimension. So quite often we do get which comes first, the cart or the horse. And again, I don't think there's any right reason, a right way to do it, rather. It's just a matter of layering them. I've had teachers who have done MMCI first and had an incredible light shine when they got that MMCI class. Oh yeah, that's exactly what that means. So I really do think it's just layering the support. Again, the MTP is going to be a bit more individualized. It is a one-on-one coaching model, whereas MMCI is delivered with several participants at a time. But what's beautiful about MMCI is that it is the see, learn, do model. And I find a lot of teachers, we've just completed the first session of MMCI, and a lot of teachers really did enjoy taking that back to the classroom and then bringing their strategies up in the next MMCI class. So I don't think there's a right answer to say this one goes first. I think it's continuing to layer the support that's delivered.
Thank you for that expansion on a little bit more about those programs and you know, what they're about and what outcomes you look for and who they might be right for. You said you made a statement. You said was it see, learn, do model? Can you say a little bit more about that?
Sure, I'll jump in. It is designed so that teachers begin to learn about a dimension, so they begin to know more. So that's an informational piece. What are the indicators within positive climate, for example? What are the behavioral markers? So they learn more about it, they gain knowledge. The next step is, once you have that information, is to be able to see those interactions within other teachers. So there is a lot of video within MMCI. Part of it is a presentation and a discussion, but then you move very quickly into a video. So can the teachers watch that video and see or identify the effective interactions related to that particular dimension? And then the next step is the do piece. Once we now know about it, we can see it when it's occurring with other teachers. How do we begin to implement it in our own classrooms? So teachers are encouraged to go back to the classroom, try to implement activities that would facilitate or foster their ability to have those effective interactions related to that dimension, then come back to the next session and talk about what they did in their own classroom, how it worked, what their challenges were. So again, it's that model that we have to know about it, we have to be able to see it or identify when it does occur before we can then begin to do it within our own classrooms.
Thank you for that expansion. I think that's a really good model to keep in mind no matter what specific strategies or solutions you're putting into place. I'm going to shift a little bit here. This question comes from Marie, and it seems like a nice transition point for us to start talking a little bit about data collection and observations. The question is, if I want to implement class, do I need to get trained observers first, or can I dive into PD for teachers right away?
Wow, that is a tough one. That is not the cart or the horse, but maybe the chicken and the egg. I think again, there's no one right way. I think you begin to think about what resources you have, what makes the most sense for your organization. I think both are important. I think clearly if you are going to start introducing the dimensions to teachers, that it would be incredibly helpful to have someone with a different level of expertise in the organization. Now that might mean that individual has become a reliable observer and they know about effective interactions. They're able to see them or identify them in classrooms, and that could be a good place to start. I think the other is to perhaps get someone involved in MMCI or myTeachstone so that those professional development resources are available. I think there's a variety of ways to do it. But in our experience, we started with building capacity with our administrators and leaders as we saw those individuals as being consistent over time. So when we looked at childcare, for example, we see a fair amount of turnover, as is common across the country, fair amount of turnover in teachers. What we do not see is turnover in owners and directors. So we felt like that was a great place to start with our childcare industry. And that meant training them to be reliable observers so that they had information, they could observe their teachers and be able to begin to provide their teachers some feedback. And we sort of expanded from there. Can I add to that, Paula?
I think Sarintha basically hit on everything. I mean, I can remember when we began to implement Act 3, you know, presented itself, we did so many intro trainings, and it was just, you know, the scope of the teachers we were trying to capture, it was so broad. And so we just started with some basic information, and that could be delivered through an introductory training. And I think, again, to echo what Sarintha said, we found that it was more important and a better investment to bring those owners and directors in, because they are not going anywhere, whereas the child care teachers may leave the industry. So we thought it was important to bring, there was more buy-in, if you will, from those owners and directors in the child care industry. It's a bit different in the Head Start and the school system, but specifically within the child care industry.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that was a really complicated question, I think, and that was a really helpful response. We did get a live question in from Megan, and she wants to know, how many teachers does each coach have generally in your experience?
If you are talking about My Teaching Partner, or MTP, I can tell you that when we first started, we asked for information from other states. I know Georgia was doing MTP at that point. Of course, California, who often does a lot of these things before most states had been doing it. We were most comparable, I think, to Georgia at the time, and Georgia was using trainers and coaches, folks who were doing a lot of technical assistance, and they were adding MTP coaching onto their existing job description. And those coaches were coaching 5 teachers over the course of the school year. As Paula mentioned, you know, trying to do 10 or even 12 cycles across the school year, 1 coach, 5 teachers, plus other job responsibilities. So we thought that was a good starting place. And we had folks like myself, Paula, other childcare owner directors, school system personnel who wore a variety of hats, master teacher, trainer kinds of folks. And we decided we were crazy to think you could add 5 teachers. So for MTP, we settled on 4 teachers, and that, I think, was a good start in that it helped the coach build their skills a lot faster, so you were getting more efficient at your ability to watch a 30-minute video clip and cut it down to 3 one-minute segments focused on the teacher's strengths. But over time, we have now gotten to where most of our coaches who have full-time jobs, you know, with other roles and responsibilities, coaching as little as 1 teacher a year. We're really trying to stick with 2. And again, I think it's also about maintaining those skills, that we don't want our coaches to lose the skills that they need to do MTP with fidelity. So I'm not sure if Megan was asking about MTP. MMCI is a little bit different because, of course, it's a group of people, and there are limits in how many people could be enrolled in the course through TeachStone. And of course, that limit is designed so that all participants have a real opportunity to be actively involved and actively engaged in those sessions. And we really just launched MMCI last year. Paula and I each taught just 1 series, and we taught it once a month. So rather than doing it once a week for 10 weeks, we did it once a month for 10 months, maybe not quite that long, but something along those lines. We've had other MMCI instructors who had other roles and responsibilities, who were teaching it every other week, and did 2 sessions within the course of 1 school year. So they were able to, reach more teachers because they did more sessions. And then last is myTeachstone, and I assume there's some limits in TeachStone in terms of how many teachers you can have enrolled, but I can tell you that for myTeachstone, I had about 25 participants in myTeachstone, and I found it challenging to find enough time to really stay on top of the teachers' responses. So if I were assigning them a video to watch and asking them a question about the effective interactions within that video, it was my job as a coach to log in regularly to see if they had responded, and then to challenge them with a follow-up question, or to see if their colleagues had also commented on the same video and see if the teachers were having dialogue. But I think we did a decent job, and we had about 25 participants. So it really depends on the model you're using, but I think it truly depends on the roles and responsibilities of the coach. And I know in some other organizations, there are people who have full-time jobs as coaches, and I would imagine that they could, do quite a bit more and impact more teachers if that's all they did.
Thank you. Yes, I think you're right. It really is so dependent on the model that you're looking at. With myTeachstone in particular, I did just want to clarify that because it really is just a web platform for data collection and coaching through it, there's no limits, but we always really do encourage anyone who's thinking about myTeachstone implementation to really make a plan and think about what that capacity, the teacher to coach capacity, is going to look like, what the goals are, and what other activity will be going on. Just as you said, you've been layering the online resources with some face-to-face coaching, and all that is going to make a difference with how many teachers a coach can really support and still be successful and be able to do a great job. So yeah, I think that it really is really based on what you're looking to achieve, what your resources are, and what's realistic. I did get a question that just came in from Brian Woodward, since we are on the topic of myTeachstone. He wanted to know a little bit more about myTeachstone, just from the perspective of a mentor. So what it's like to use the system, and really what's best practice in mentoring, and how you can use that myTeachstone system to implement those coaching best practices.
I'm just trying to think about if mentoring is different than coaching, and I guess it just depends on how Brian, I believe, is defining those terms. I guess we've always used the term and thought about it as coaching, and the coach is in a different role than the teacher, and I guess I'm thinking that mentoring could be more of a colleague who is mentoring a teacher. Maybe there's a master teacher down the hall, or even just a more experienced teacher who's mentoring a brand new teacher coming into a site. But I guess with that said, when we think about the recommended practices for coaching, it's about developing relationships, of course, and building that trust, and ensuring that the person who is being coached or being mentored is actually comfortable with their coach or mentor, so that they don't feel vulnerable, I guess. So there's a relationship that's grounded in supporting that teacher in a positive way so that she feels like she is being supported and she can ask questions and she can look at her own practices and feel comfortable to challenge herself. I'm struggling here. I'm not sure I'm really answering the question, so I'll maybe ask if Paula's got something to add.
And I'll just clarify to maybe help you out a bit. Brian did clarify that he was thinking about coach and mentor as synonymous, and that they, for his in his region, they consider it's called a coach/mentor in the job description. So those are it seems like those are being used synonymously.
So to me, I think the real key is that relationship piece, that there has to be sufficient contact, sufficient interaction, so that those relationships can be built. I think that the coach really has to focus on the strengths of the teacher in building that relationship and really using, again, as we said a couple of times, those parallel processes so that the coach becomes skilled in asking the teacher to think about her practices, asking her the why questions, the how questions, and really modeling those strategies. I'll just share that when I think about my own coaching and when I look at the support I've gotten from the national experts at MMCI, and I've had many awesome ones, Rebecca Friedman, Andra Paisley, they challenge me every time to use those same parallel processes. And as might be evident right now, I do a lot of talking. I talk a lot, and I have to, I think, sit back and make sure that I'm using good strategies as a coach to really support the teacher, develop the relationship, build the trust, and then support the teacher to sort of explore her own strengths and areas that she wants to work on, and challenge her to think about what she's doing, how she's doing it, and why she's using some of those strategies.
The relationship that Sarintha is referring to comes a bit more easier with MTP because it is so individualized. And so myTeachstone, it's a little more difficult on the coach's part to build those relationships because you've got so many participants, but it is so important, and that is one of the reasons why we built the face-to-face conference into MTP, because you do then see the teacher become more vulnerable and open to new ideas, and really just doing a bit more self exploration when she feels comfortable that this is not a negative environment. This is very comforting, and just like positive climate, it's a climate of just let's share, I'm here to help you.
Yeah, thank you. It's really useful, and I'll just point out, as someone who's very familiar with myTeachstone since the beginning, we really, as we were building it, really intended it to be a tool for coaches to use, but not necessarily something that would replace those coaching interactions and those face-to-face or even online, but synchronous interactions that a coach and teacher would have to build that relationship, but really a supportive foundational tool to be able to perhaps carry a bigger caseload or put some of that work online, just to be able to spread out your time in a more efficient way. But I think layering that with some kind of coaching or some kind of coursework is really important, because like you said, the relationship is so key in that coaching relationship. So we've got a little less than 10 minutes left, and we did have quite a few questions related to data collection and observation. So I was just going to turn the conversation there at this point. We did have a question from Jenny. She had a few questions in one, so I'll try to summarize here. Jenny wanted to know, who does the class observations in your community? She was specifically thinking about whether you use outside observers or internal observers to the programs, and whether you see that there's any difference between internal or external observers in your experience if you do work with both.
Great question, and we can certainly speak to that. In Louisiana, we've got it set up in a way that all lead agencies are responsible for their own observations. So basically what that means is that, for instance, Jefferson Parish is responsible for securing all, how many?
Oh, the number of classrooms. I block that out often, Paula. Let's just leave it at this, though. A lot of observations across all those publicly funded teachers, but the critical issue is that it's every fall and every spring for every teacher.
So hundreds of observations need to be done. And so we do have local observers that go in. Some of those local observers may be principals of their own center, of their own schools. They may be center directors of their own sites. So of course that has resulted in some concerns. So what Louisiana Department of Education has done is create a third party called P-Card that comes in and does a percentage of those observations within each school, each Head Start, and each child care center. So that third party is there to more or less confirm that those local observations are in fact reliable. And based on the research, they are in fact such. So we have found that over the past 2 years of doing the observations, that both the local and third party are reliable. We have seen some trends that may be present within directors who just tend to score a little bit higher or a little bit lower, but we're able to identify those trends and meet with those directors. And then TeachStone rather has got tools like calibration in place. And so we do that locally as well to try to keep everyone reliable. In addition to that, what we also do is a percentage of our observations are shadow scored. And so that's just yet another way to confirm that our reliable observers are in fact reliable. So that is where 2 reliable observers go in at the same time, observe the same 20-minute, 4 20-minute cycles. They score independently, and then they'll compare the scores after they do their independent scoring. So that's, again, just yet another way to ensure reliability within the local observers. But again, Louisiana Department of Education has required both local scores, shadow scoring, and third-party scores. So we have seen reliability across the board, and I can assure you, like Jenna Conway, superintendent, assistant superintendent says, it's like taking a pair of binoculars and looking across the state, and we've been able to really look into each classroom with that class lens.
Thank you for that. We've got just another couple of minutes left, so I'm thinking hopefully we can get one more question in. And this last question is from Angela. She wants to know whether you ever use outdoor time as one of the 4 cycles in a class observation. If you do, how do you determine whether or not to consider outdoor time?
That is a great question, and I'll answer it a couple of ways. One, as a policy in Louisiana, teachers are not observed outdoors, especially in the pre-K classrooms. And, you know, for obvious reasons, they're on big playground areas, and there's a lot of noise, and it's very difficult to hear the adult-child interactions that occur. When we think about our local network observations, we actually try to be a little more flexible and say that it depends on the outdoor space and the age of the children. I have actually done some observations where teachers went outside with their children, and it was a small playground and it was somewhat secluded, and I felt comfortable that I could actually hear and see the adult-child interactions that were occurring. So I guess our answer is that it really depends, but as a policy, and given the importance of class scores in Louisiana for performance profiles, then generally outdoor observations do not occur.
Thank you so much for clarifying and addressing that one. I know that indoor, outdoor observations are always a big topic that come up, so that's helpful. We are right at 2:58, so I wanted to go ahead and first of all say thank you to Paula and Sarintha. This has been such a fantastic event, and both of you are such a wealth of knowledge, experience, and passion for improving child outcomes. So we can't thank you enough for joining us today and taking the hot seat with these really complicated and challenging and meaty questions that we got today. So it's fantastic. I was able to make technology work for me in this last minute and pull up a slide. So we did want to let you all know that Sarintha and Paula were kind enough to share their email addresses if you wish to reach out to them individually and ask about their experiences. I've included my email address as well. And we've also included the URL to join the class community. It's a place to chat with people like Paula and Sarintha and lots of other class users and experts, and really get those discussions and great brainstorms about class going. So thanks to everyone. And Megan, do we have any additional questions or comments? Okay, great. So thanks to everyone so much for attending on this Friday afternoon and sticking with us with our technology troubles. We were able to, I think, get a great session out of it. And I hope everyone has a fantastic weekend.